The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as religion, sports, aviation, business, literature, and politics. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Lee Archer, one of the most famous of the Tuskegee Airmen. But as we begin our show, let us go to a film clip from a documentary produced in 1945, narrated by Ronald Reagan, Wings for This Man, telling about our exploits as we go on a mission.
It's morning, 20 miles from the enemy. These are American boys going to morning fighter patrol. They're flying over Italy, and there are others like them flying over Burma, over the coast of Holland, over China, and over Germany, in search of the enemy. Enemy planes. The odds are bad this morning, nearly 3-1. The routine morning patrol goes on. They close the range, 3,500 feet, 3,000, 2,500, 2,000. The odds are still 3-1. But it's 3 Nazis spinning down in blood and flame to every one of ours. Routine morning patrol.
Lee, that was really exciting again to see us going on that mission. You have given so many speeches, as have I, to various schools, forums, military groups, etc. And I was wondering what message you would like to deliver, you try to deliver when you make these presentations.
Well, number one is, of course, to try to get young African Americans, male and female, interested in aviation. It's our last frontier in the air, above the earth, and to see more of them become interested. But to do this, I believe we have to let them know that no one can decide for them their qualities, their abilities, and the things they are. That we, African Americans, can do anything anyone else can do. And no one else should be able to convince them by negative portrayals, by negative statements and all, that they can't do something.
Well, the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, as we both know, is one of overcoming prejudice and discrimination when they said we couldn't do it, we shouldn't do it, and not going to let us do it. Now, how do young people respond in this year, 2004, 21st century, to the fact that we really couldn't do that? And how did we take it? What are some of their responses?
Well, truthfully, some of their responses disturb me because they don't think it was a hell of an accomplishment. And some of them don't realize that what they're doing and the acceptance they have is built on what some other people did before them. Just as we, the Tuskegee Airmen, stood on the shoulders of a lot of other African Americans who came before us, and they're standing on ours. And there's a generation between them that really took the ball and ran with it. These are men and women now who retired from the services as colonels and generals and chiefs of staffs and things like that. All those were opportunities built on our activities, and our activities were built on so many men before us, men and women before us. So I get disturbed when they tend to believe that they have accomplished this on their own. They haven't. And if I could convince them at all that all they are another step up in this battle for full equality and rights, and that they have to do it, and they have to prepare those who are coming behind them for this battle. It's going to be a never-ending battle.
This has to do with racism in American society. And unfortunately, some African American youth just succumb and go into negative behaviors and don't move themselves ahead. But there are many who do go to school, go into professions, go into various areas, and some of them tend to think it was always this way.
Oh,
The
yes.
fact is, it wasn't always this way.
Oh, yes. I've had, speaking at the Air Force Academy a couple of years ago, an African-American student accused me of elaborating on the activities, the negative activities of being a Tuskegee Airman, the racism, the place where they put us to train, the fact that we had and when the commanding officer of the academy assured him that I was not exaggerating, that's the way it was, he reacted in horror and stated, "You must be out of your mind. Our government would never do anything like that."
Of course, he never read the history books. Tell our audience about your attempts to get into the Tuskegee Airmen, which is a classic example of this discrimination.
It's probably the same thing that happened to a lot of others, but not so blatantly. I was a New Yorker. This is my town, from childhood, from birth up. In 1940, late 40, the idea of World War II was in my mind. I knew that sooner or later we'd be in it. If anybody that read the papers and talked to anyone knew that was going to happen. And I was a fan of World War I, aerial warfare. That was the glamour of the World War I. And I was a nut about flying, and I had no idea as a college student in New York, very early college student, that it was impossible for me. And I went down to register for the Army Air Corps with two friends of mine, both white. And we took the test. In those days, they corrected it in front of you. And when we got out, we debated, and I bragged that I got a better mark than the other two and everything else. And we went back to school. And about a month later, both of them came to tell me did you get your notice, Lee? And I said, no, I didn't. And they went off to the Army Air Corps. I decided to go down to Worth Street and debate the matter with them. Why not me? I had a better mark. I only knew two better marks that I had better than anyone, but I assumed that that I was better than a lot of other people. And they told me, no, you can't do it. And after being harassed by them a couple of times, a young officer down there finally told me, he said, look, he said, you're never going to get in the Army Air Corps. We don't have any colored in the Army Air Corps. There's no unit to go to. There's nothing you can do. So that's it. So don't bother us anymore. Well, I bothered him. I talked to my dad, and I talked to every local politician. I complained. And finally, I got a letter from the Army Air Corps, from the Army, actually. And it said to me, congratulations, thank you for joining the Army. We're happy to have you. Well, I dashed downtown again, thank God for the subways, and said, hey, no, I didn't. I volunteered for the Army Air Corps. And they said, no, you volunteered for the Army with the hopes of being in the Army Air Corps. And since there's no organization, no unit, no way, you're out. But we're accepting you. And they informed me that I should report to Camp Upton in about, I think it was about 2 weeks. And then what I thought at the time was a subtle threat. They said to me, if you can't find your way to Camp Upton, we'll have someone escort you.
Like the MPs.
I didn't know what they were, I didn't know the military, but I knew it was a threat. So I reported, Chairman. They put me in the infantry and shipped me off to one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, to a place called Camp Wheeler in a town called Macon, Georgia, outside of a town called Macon, Georgia. And on the way down there on the train, we all started from Camp Upton, black, white, indifferent, in the same train. When we got to Washington, the capital of my country that I was going away to fight for, they pulled us out of the train, separated the whites from us, and put us in the first two cars, the colored, so-called colored troops in the first two cars, and we were segregated all the way to Macon, Georgia. I was furious. While at Macon, in the infantry, I did pretty well. I became a telegrapher, and then finally an instructor in telegraphy and field network communications. And in 41, they decided on the Tuskegee experiment somewhere in Washington. And they came back to us. First mistake the government ever made in enforcing segregation. They asked all of us who had been refused if we were still interested. And we all said yes, I think. I don't know anybody that I ever met that said no. And what they got was probably some of the smartest, best educated, athletically inclined, African-American young men that they had ever known.
Who were then trained at the Tuskegee Air Base outside of Tuskegee Institute, the great college.
I reported to Tuskegee. They sent me up to the, quote, the white base at Camp Wheeler. Camp Wheeler had must be 50,000 troops on it, and 2,000 of them were probably African-American. There was a main base and the 16th Battalion base, which was the colored base. And we were all there. So we had to go up to the main base, actually, again, to be accepted into the Army Air Corps. And I was given a reporting date of December the 25th in 1942.
All right, let us pause for a moment. The Tuskegee Airmen are best known for their record escorting bombers over Europe, never having lost one to enemy fighters. So let's take a moment to look at a clip from a film documentary produced in England called Night Fighters. And it takes us on the beginning of our escort missions. So let's look at that.
The escorts could never find their bombers again. And then the enemy could pounce. Benjamin Davis, the black commander, had won the battle for the 99th at his Washington hearing. The Air Force was told, by the politicians yet again, that the black flyers were to stay flying. But now, Davis suddenly saw a real opportunity for his men.
Colonel Davis briefed us over and over that your job is to keep the fighters away from the bombers, that they might do that job. Your job is not to go out and shoot down fighters and become an ace, but your first job is to take care of the bombers, and that, I think, we did quite well.
The black flyers believed they had found their vocation, a task which perfectly suited their talents as a highly disciplined group of flyers who had been together for many months, who had been trained longer than white flyers, and who were headed by an iron leader. Reinforced by 3 more squadrons, the 99th became the 332nd Fighter Group. Still segregated, they were now based at Ramitelli in northern Italy. They were re-equipped with the Mustang P-51, the best fighter plane of the Second World War. They painted the tails of their Mustangs a bold and brave red.
Okay, Arch, doesn't that bring back some memories?
Yes, it does. Of course, we're notorious or famous, infamous, whatever, for the escort missions. That's because it gave us opportunity to see other fighters, enemy fighters, and take them on, prove our worth, which was the evaluation in those days, Hemenia. But it all fails ever to show one of the things that I think was probably as important, and that was the ground strafing and attacks on trains and all, and where we lost most of the people that we lost during the war.
66 Tuskegee Airmen were lost in combat.
That's correct, and 32 more were shot down who didn't get killed and became prisoners of war.
And that's out of 450 who were overseas in the 4 squadrons, the 99th Squadron, the 100th, the 301, and the 302. You were served in the 302, I served in the 100th.
That's correct. And it's very seldom, because there's no glamour, I suppose, in ground strafing and attacking targets on the water or on the land, on trains and things like that. But the excitement is the one-on-one combat individuals. I suppose the last of the gentleman fighters, the last of the duelers. And it is still the glamour. In fact, I regret, because the young fighter pilots nowadays, they cannot do that. I mean, the machines they're flying now are machines.
And they shoot somebody down from over a mile away with the computers.
They never see it. It's regrettable. They never know how good they are or aren't.
Well, tell me the story, which you reported to me just a few moments ago, about an episode where you were able to show the chivalry of air combat.
It was, Dr. Brown, was probably a stupid little thing. On the first mission, we got a victory. It must have been maybe 10 or 12 air coverage missions. I was flying with Pruitt.
Wendell Pruitt, one of our most famous pilots.
Yes. The only person on earth, I admit, was as good as me or better.
That's until you met me.
And I got on the tail of a German fighter, Me-109. Well, first we passed each other head on, and we spent about a minute or so with each trying to get behind the other. I finally got him on an angle and slipped in behind him and fired at him. His wing kind of fell off, the right wing, and he bailed out. Airplanes all over the place, Oz and Germans. And when his chute opened, an airplane went by him, and I don't even remember whether it was Oz or theirs, but immediately I thought, somebody's going to shoot this guy in his parachute, and I don't want that, because someday I may be hanging in a parachute. It's self-centered, but really it was more chivalry. I said, no, he fought and he's out. And so I turned and tried to cut off the airplane that was heading toward him. And Pruitt actually thought maybe I was going to do it, because he said, no, Lee, no. And as I went by, I pulled up in a chandelle, and Pruitt followed me. And then I circled the man in the chute until he hit the ground. And when he hit the ground, I guess he was worried, because he let go of the chute, he jumped out of the chute, and he started running. And I pulled down behind him, and as I passed over him, I wiggled my wings a little bit. Stories I had heard about in World War I, that pilots shot down other German pilots, and then the old chivalry baloney as it was. But I believed in it then.
But there's a certain lack of logic in that. They were fighting over their own country.
Yes.
And many times we'd shoot down a pilot, he would bail out, he'd go down and get another plane and come back and shoot us down.
That's it.
So I agree that I too wouldn't want to shoot anybody in the parachute, because I wouldn't want them to shoot me. But the fact is, there is a certain amount of lack of logic in that, even in that chivalry. But of course, chivalry is not logical anyway. It's moral.
It's moral.
It's how you feel about
concept.
people, how you feel about the human beings. Because I know when I shot down this German jet over Berlin, blew him right up, and he bailed right out. I had the same instinct. Should I go get him? I said, no, I shouldn't go get him, because that could be me.
No, but incidentally, no matter how bad the fellow is in his own areas and all, he's doing what you're doing. He's fighting for his country, even when his country is wrong. which is what we were doing. Our country was wrong about us, and we were still fighting for them, risking our lives. And I still think the chivalry of not killing a defenseless man and someone who's just done his best. And then on top of that, you say, hell, I got him once, I can get him again. If he's back up again tomorrow,
you will get him again.
I'll get him again.
Well, the Tuskegee Airmen's record was that we never lost one bomber we were escorting to enemy fighters, a record that no group in history achieved. And it took a long time for us to be recognized for this, maybe like 50 years. What's your reaction to that?
We should have learned by now that getting credit for what we do comes very hard. It's almost like pulling teeth out of the people who give it to you. We were very fortunate. We had a commander that had a longer range view than a bunch of youngsters, 21, 22. He was an old man. I think he was 26 or 27.
No, he was 30.
Huh?
He was 30.
30? Okay.
Yeah.
So, but as far as I was concerned, he was an old man, and but he had the idea, and he had experienced it with the 99th, that if given a chance, they would send us home. And his idea was that if we lost the bomber, and they could blame us for it, that there would be people in the states, congressmen, senators, and that would be saying, bring them home, whereas a white group could lose 50 of them, and they'd say, well, that's combat. So he said, you don't leave the bombers, ever. You stay with them. And we did. We did it because he was our leader, and that was his rule.
And the interesting thing is, most of the pilots all the pilots we were protecting, bomber pilots, were white because we were the only black pilots. But most of them didn't know that the people protecting them were African Americans, and they knew the shining red tails we had on our planes, and they wanted us to protect them. And later, years later, you and I both have met pilots who were bomber pilots and said, well, you were the red tails, thank you very much. As a matter of fact, we've given speeches, and some of the white officers and enlisted men who were on those bombers actually got up and demanded. Tell us a story about the guy who demanded to be heard.
Oh, that was in a convention in Atlanta, one of our first conventions at Tuskegee Airmen. And it was in the paper that we were meeting and all. And during the meeting, a little ruckus started at the front door, and someone wanted to come in. And it was a white male, about our ages, and he insisted, and he was making so much noise that we finally said, let him in, you know, not a Tuskegee Airman, let him in. So he came in, and then finally he jumped up and said, I want to say something. And whoever was president at the time, I've forgotten who it was, but he says, all right, let him talk so we can get rid of him. And the gentleman came to the front, and he said, I'm a bomber pilot in World War II, he says, and I saw you guys out there, and all the time you protected us. He says, and I wanted to say thank you. He said, I came almost 500 miles when I heard about this to tell you people thank you for it. And he said, we didn't know you were colored. That was his turn. He said, we didn't know you were colored, and we didn't know anything about it, but we knew that the red tails would stay with us. He said, so thank you, thank you, thank you. And someone bit and said, well, how come you didn't know we were colored? And he said, well, he said, with the helmet on and the scarf, he says, and the jacket, he said, you look like everybody else. And he left the stage and walked by. And as he passed me, I touched his arm and I said, hey, fella. And he said, oh, yes. I said, we are like everybody else.
Beautiful.
And he stood there for a second, and then he smiled and walked away.
No, history has a great message for the world. What happened in the past, what might happen in the future. You, Lee Archer, were the only ace of the Tuskegee Airmen. You shot down 5 planes. A hero, a true American hero. What do you say to youth now, other than the fact that they can accomplish anything? What do you say about our legacy to them?
Well, our legacy to them is, when we started this conversation, was that you can do remarkable things if you want to, but you have to be prepared. You can remember Chappie James, General James. He used to say all the time that when opportunity knocks, don't say, hey, wait while I get my bags. And by bags, he always meant your education, the training, the self-respect and ability and things like that. He says, when opportunity knocks, have them all ready. And when you open the door and he says, I'm opportunity, jump in his arms and go with him. I think that's what we have to do. We have to have our young people prepared. And one of the basic preparations, of course, is education. The second basic preparation, in my estimation, is self-respect. Mm-hmm. Some idea of who you are and what you are. And the third, of course, is take the opportunities. Don't let it pass by because you think it's impossible. If I had known about the 1925 Army War College study that said African Americans could not fly airplanes.
You wouldn't have been Lee Archer, the Tuskegee Airman, who has led the way along with many, many others, Ben Davis and many, many others, to open the skies and to open the opportunity of African Americans. Thanks to Lee Archer, Tuskegee Airman, for being our guest on today's African American Legends.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
The Black Flyers believed they had found their vocation, a task which perfectly suited their talents as a highly disciplined group of flyers who had been together for many months, who had been trained longer than white flyers, and who were headed by an iron leader. Reinforced by 3 more squadrons, the 99th became the 332nd Fighter Group. Still segregated, they were now based at Ramitelli in northern Italy. They were re-equipped with the Mustang P-51, the best fighter plane of the Second World War. They painted the tails of their Mustangs a bold and brave red.
The routine morning patrol goes on. They close the range. 3,500 feet. 3,000. 2,500. 2,000. The odds are still 3 to 1. But it's 3 Nazis spinning down in blood and flame to every one of ours. Routine morning patrol. They're good planes, wonderful planes, and their pilots are good too.